So Wacera, it's fantastic to have you as part of the photo editor series. In the series, we're trying to talk to photo editors from around the world to get their perspectives on the profession, on the industry, and how they go about their work. And we're really looking forward to hearing from you about, in particular, Everyday Africa and how it operates, because I think it is an extraordinarily important initiative that's been very successful over the years. And I guess to begin with, could you outline for us a little bit about your background as a freelancer and how you came to work for Everyday Africa, and what are the sort of major responsibilities that you have with the organization?
Thanks, David and Ilvy. My name is Wacera. I am a photo editor based in Nairobi, but currently in Kampala. I enjoy working with story and the power of story, and I got started working in the storytelling business by just going to journalism school. I learned how to write story mostly for branding, because that's what universities teach. But then out of curiosity, I learned how to use the camera, and later on Adobe, and learned how to, edit a whole magazine story and pitch a story and have my stories on my favorite newspapers, magazines, blogs. And that's how I started freelancing, basically in journalism school. Then after graduating, my work experience started as a marketing communications associate, because in Nairobi, at least from my own experience, it's hard to transition from journalism school to be a straight up journalist and get into the legacy newsrooms. It's very difficult to do that fresh out of school. So I got into, it was around 2017, 2018, where I got into, Nairobi was hot Silicon Valley type. So there are so many companies building apps, and they needed teams to tell their branding stories and make photos for their branding. And Nairobi was a nice place to hire at the time. And so goes the tech story. So from then on, I was still freelancing, because there are so many stories to be told here, and the wires take on documentary photography a little bit more responsive. They're more responsive than legacy newsrooms here in East Africa. So I sent some of my stories to the AP, pitched them to my favorite independent media sites like Galdem in the UK, and got my portfolio thicker, growing a little bit thicker. And that I just knew that there's no way I would work without telling a story. That's the most fun way to work, to tell a story and earn from it. So in 2020, I joined the Everyday Projects to run the Africa cohort, the Everyday Africa, which is a collective of African photographers based across the continent. And their main focus is to broaden the perception that many people have about Africa by telling the day-to-day, regular, mundane, showing the mundane images, so that we can know that Africa is beyond all the stereotypes that the news legacy has applied to it. Yeah, so I guess that's a little bit of a background. I don't know, so take
Yeah.
so much. Yeah.
You said it was difficult to get into journalism in the legacy newsrooms in East Africa. I mean, and the wires were a bit more responsive and so on. What is kind of the situation with local media in East Africa? Is it commissioning work from photographers? Is it using visuals in storytelling? Or is that something that the wires do and local media doesn't do?
Well, I feel like the role of the photograph goes beyond any type of media, print, new media, like the photograph is here to stay, period. So either local news stations want to buy my documentary story, photography stories or not, there's still a market for it. I just need to, it's now up to us as creatives and as, how do they call us now, like creative, like business owners. Like it's a whole thing now where artists must now run their crafts as businesses, so that we can know that when we are producing our photographic stories, we know where to trade them. Luckily, the role that photographs play, especially in the new media, has opened up a door, a very unique door for African artists, African visual artists, African photographers, especially in the context of telling frequent stories from the continent. So many documentary photographers are finding ways to to share their work with magazines and that are very like digital based, or work with a lot of work with publications that are like very strictly new media or very strictly digital, so that they can get an opportunity to share their stories often, because I feel like traditional media is very restrictive and it already has its people. So we have to wait. As we wait, we'll explore the opportunity that's on the internet. Yeah. So.
And do you think that East African media is turning principally to East African photographers to do the visual work, or do they think that international photographers are more important? I mean, how do they balance that commitment to work with local photographers versus international photographers?
As old as news, so, and I think as old like news structures, because it's still a very much top-down approach to visual storytelling. Parachute journalism is still very much a practice that many wires practice because it's affordable, it's easier, it's already, it's time it's not as time consuming as finding someone on the ground. So I think the effects of the top-down approach to like finding visuals of Africa is still very very present. So unless I feel like the power of new media has opened up the opportunity for African photographers to come in collectives or in groups and just use their influence to kind of try to tell the stories fast, then the story will do the work and not the other way around. It's still very hard. This is a Western culture that has weaved itself into the news culture, which we consume here every day. So until there's space for photographers here to give their stories and not be looked for, if this makes sense. I hope this makes sense. Well, yeah, we need to and learn that top-down approach. We're not looking for African photographers. We've always been there. We just need to, how do I say, like work towards an inclusive and anti-racist collaboration, which needs for us to just accept a lot of faults in the structure, change our business communication structures, change how we price things, consider how cameras and insurance does or does not work here. So there's so many things to consider if we want to change that approach to storytelling, which is still very stringent. Yeah.
I mean, in Europe and North America, to an extent, there's been kind of a reckoning in photography following the Me Too issues, some greater attention to questions of diversity, and some greater attention to the need to be more inclusive and so on. I think there's a tremendous amount of work still to be done on all those areas and so on. How do you, from Nairobi, how do you view that about what's happening in photography in Europe and North America? And how are those issues about identity and inclusiveness and so on circulating and percolating in East Africa itself? Are they the same sorts of issues that kind of Europe and North America is confronting, or are they different?
That's such an interesting, thick question. so many questions in one. But I guess my main answer, which I'll derive a little notes from, will just be the idea that I'm excited about being a part of like the African photographic scene is that we recognize that photography and the medium of photography is already its own tool of empowerment. So it's outside of the work of the camera just being a documentation tool. We know it has the power to empower us, to let us tell our stories, to help us let go of some trauma. There's this tool that has been linked to so much pain and terrorism, racism, even to this day, we can use it as a tool of empowerment. And I think that is what is exciting, even in seeing different projects from African photographers across the continent. They're using their stories as a catalyst for wide-reaching social change, even outside of still photographers. We can see directors of photographers who are being slowly exposed to the Netflix world, who are from the continent, using the camera as a tool to reach many people and show them that our stories matter still. And to answer your last question, that we have so many of the same woes. They're just in assuming that we don't all share suffering is ignorance. And I think the excitement that I have of being a storyteller at this time, despite of the challenges of the structural challenges, is knowing that my work or the tools that I have in my access are already a medium to lift myself up, if that makes sense. I feel this is so optimistic, which can be a little bit toxic, but I feel yeah, that would be my response to your question, David.
I think we could do with a little bit more toxic optimism if that's the case. That would be a good thing. I mean, one thing I wonder about is that we often talk about African photographers, but we're trying to complicate the view of Africa. Africa is not a single entity. I mean, are you comfortable with talking about African photographers as, I don't know, would we talk about Kenyan photographers or Ugandan photographers? Is there an issue in terms of the naming of the community and how we think about the community, so that we can acknowledge the differences and diversity within the community?
I feel like as much as there's the trick of branding, the challenge would always be, are we finding the stories from the countries that we don't normally see on TV? The challenge is as much as we try to, we have, for example, the original 44 photographers who started the collective are spread across the globe right now. Are we welcoming young budding photographers who are Gen Z right now, who are telling down stories right now? I feel like for us, the challenge has not been like the name, the branding, more than it is, I hope, well, like how we find our stories, we try our best to dismantle the structure of storytelling that we keep on criticizing, especially that we have different tools of war. For example, the camera phone and Instagram and at least the internet. So I feel like the challenge is not taking on the Everyday Africa title. It's more in, is our programming amplifying local young voices? Is it shifting away the power from the monolithic narratives of, for example, Western branding? For example, because I guess just a little bit of addition. I'm reading one of my favorite books that I never want to finish. It's written by the writer Wacera Njagi, and they describe how Western vocabulary can sometimes be what holds us back. Because, for example, if I feel like if there's so many storytellers, for example, who I've talked to between last Wednesday and today, they not only use the camera, they also use their words, they also use paint. They're not restricted to medium, especially because their whatever stories is in their minds, it's so big and they want to express everything. So even anytime, for example, I try to call one of the people I know a photographer, they feel like it's holding them back. Some of these narratives of Western branding sometimes can hold us back from our true potential of like authentic storytelling. I don't know whether that's getting a little bit close to an answer. But I hope what I'd like to articulate is the challenge is, sorry.
Could you maybe name an example of how that's holding you back, that kind of storytelling with the Western language? Would you have like just an example for us? Might be,
okay.
I don't know.
Okay, I can try to come up with an example. Okay, cool. So this is a little bit tricky, but I guess in the context of if we want to tell, how do I say, okay, Akweke tries to describe how like our storytelling is sometimes even beyond the 3D. Like there is more to creative outside of the academic, and I feel like there are so many artists, for example, at this moment who are using, for example, the camera and researching their spiritual ancestry. For example, there are twin siblings in South Africa who are, I'll share with you a link soon. I don't want to mistake the pronunciation of their names, but they worked with the camera to find out more about their their past, their spiritual past, their spiritual beginnings, and also find out what their spiritual purposes is through the camera. So I feel like just saying they're photographers is limiting them. If that makes sense. I feel like they're spiritual, like artists and beyond, and whatever they could label themselves. I hope that that's a good example.
Yeah.
So not putting people in boxes necessarily in any way. Yeah, preferably.
I mean, at the same time, I mean, you very powerfully said earlier, you know, that the photograph is here to stay, and you want that to be the situation. What do you feel is special about photography as a storytelling tool? What do you think the photograph contributes to storytelling, even when it's associated with all the other forms of communicating?
That is such a tricky question because there's so many answers, but I think what sticks out to me is the timelessness of the image, the fact that the photo can carry the present, the past, and the future all at once. It's a very conflicting medium, the camera and photography, because so much violence is still being rolled out courtesy of this tool. But now I think what is interesting to me as a photographer is how you bring in your own self-will in front with the tool. You see what your self-will and your camera can come together and what story it can form. Because, for example, I have I think every weekend I always talk to my friends about how I hated knowing that there were like 2-3 stories that were parachute journalism. and like I knew that some people who would be perfect for the story, and it's 2022, you know. And so I'm like, as much as it's easy to complain about that, how, and also, the violences of the camera are very blatant, but the power of, I feel like the perfect photo is when you can see the person's will and the collaboration of their technique using the camera. Yeah. It's a very tricky question, this.
In some ways, there's certainly no right answer, but there's no easy answer to it. You know, it's something to start a conversation itself. We could have a whole session on that itself, I think. Wacera, why don't you're going to share with us some work from some of the stories you put together, one of the stories you put together on Everyday Africa. So why don't you show that and talk us through who the photographer is and what the story is, and how you came to select this in your editorial role.
Sure.
And while you're doing that, just a reminder to folks in the audience, if you have any questions, drop them into the Q&A box. We'll bring them in during the discussion or at the end.
So this work the work that I'll share with you is made by documentary photographer Mohamed Dawood. He's a Sudanese photographer who has been documenting the Sudan revolution since he was 16 years old. And this is from last year, stuck in the middle of the civilian protests. And this story to me was, I think the challenge was picking a story that stood out as amongst stories we've shared on Everyday Africa. And for me, many have, but for me, this was important to share because first, the photographer has been covering this for years. Like, this is not just a moment where he popped in and went back home. this is his home, this is his everyday life, and just from that logic, he's fulfilled the thematic approach of Everyday Africa. Secondly, just I don't want to get. I'm very anti nuance because the academia failed me, but so I'll try to be as simple as as straightforward as possible. But I think that the camera phone and Instagram has helped us as African photographers to be able to show that what is happening here in our homes is also happening in their homes. This is protest culture. Is not really, I really even hate saying the word protest culture because it's not really a thing. We've been protesting for a while now across the world and still are. And the work that Mohammed Dawood and his fellow photographers in Sudan are doing is essential, because even though we won't see, even though we fear, okay, we will see these photos in the wires, yeah, but we will see different framing, and some of the framing is what, and that framing is what fuels the negative stereotypes around protest culture in Africa. So I think what Mohammed Dawood does so good is tell the truth, but it's also, I don't want to say this word, but it's kind, like it's not, it's the truth that is not adulterated, but it is what it is, but it does not show people in their most vulnerable state.
Mm-hmm.
It just shows people, looking towards their goal, which is, fighting for their freedom and fighting for their electoral rights. So I'll switch really quickly to.
I mean, it really shows them as active agents of their own situation, as you say. So not passive victims, not just sitting back, but popular movements taking charge and so on. And I think that's a significant thing in this sort of work.
And I think there's a lot of dignity in these images as well, where the people are protesting, but they're not showed in a way that you kind of, the images I know very well from demonstrations, can kind of show a side where only violence, for instance, is shown, because that works on the wires quite well, while this seems more like more a combination of daily life as well. So I can imagine why this also ended up with Everyday Africa in that sense.
Yeah.
And he was already one of your photographers then, I'm guessing. He was part already of Everyday.
He's a contributor to the African Photojournalism Database, which is a collaborative database with the World Press Photo Foundation. And every APJD member has the right, and we'll welcome their stories to always be shared on Everyday Africa's platforms. Yeah.
So are you then the one when all the images go in or come in, do you edit what selections are going through to the website or through social media, or both maybe?
Yes. So once the photographer is on the ground, and they really don't do much editing on the ground, especially in this context. So I make sure everything they send so many raw files, so we must have to make a selection. I like having a second eye amongst my team, because internal bias is global. So I might miss something that my colleague won't. So once we clean them up, we work on the copy, check it, take it back to the photographer, because I think copy, especially for protest season, election work, I feel the photographer should check it again. So we go through a little back and forth, make sure the photo and the copy edits are right, then we share them on the platform when the time is right.
So the text that's coming in, is that like captions, or is it usually longer stories that you then have to edit, or?
It depends. So for example, this story, we published it 3 times over a period of, maybe there's a July story, there's an October story, then there's a next January story. So there's always context relating back to the previous story. So, but some of them many of them on Everyday Africa are single stories. So this is just like one of the favorites.
That keeps coming. Yeah, keeps coming back also because it's ongoing, of course. And did I understand you correct that he would send in the raw images, or in general photographers send in raw images, or do they just send them in like as a checkup that you want to see the raws, or do you always edit these images from raw images?
Not always. Sometimes they already have their favorites, also dependent on the angle that they prefer to take, or they've already chosen to take when on the ground. So at least most of them, the photographers have their favorite edits, but they give me a broader selection so that we can have a variety to choose from.
And you combine your work as an editor with your work as a photographer. I think that must be quite a tough job, because to me it feels like, as a photojournalist or as a photographer, it can be such a full-time thing because you have to arrange a lot of things and then also do the shoots. So I can imagine you must be quite busy. Can you kind of describe how much time you spend on doing the editing and how much time goes into your own photography work?
My photography, I feel like it's very sporadic, comes with what the young people call the feels. I only work on my favorite projects when I feel it's the right time.
Nice.
Yeah. I feel like since at the moment I'm currently working on a story, I feel which is around the election season. It's a broad time. There are many things to choose from. So I feel like it won't happen again in 4 years, in 5 years. So it's a nice time to pick something with legs, something which is thick. So I guess to answer your question, I go with the feels. Every day I work with Everyday Africa most of my week, like selecting stories and working with photographers. But my personal freelancing projects are very much with the feels.
Yeah, when it feels right, you start them. So what are the kind of stories that you really like to see coming in from photographers at Everyday Africa?
I feel as much as this may sound corny, I feel like I like stories that are like, I feel like, okay, it's based on how I thought when I started pitching stories to editors. And I always thought, why are editors not excited about this type of energy? But I feel like I like stories that are very driven to the personal, as much as they are documenting other people's lives. I like when, I think why I was drawn to Everyday Africa is because as many there are stories, there are many personal experiences on there, many first-hand emotional private moments. And I feel like even looking through the audience engagement in the comments, you find those stories with some emotional connects, having even people even chip in their own personal experiences. And I think that's the idea of telling a story on new media, like having camaraderie by, you know, feeling confident to share your own story on that because someone else did. So that's my favorite type, when people share their personal beats that make other people want to share their own personal stories. Yeah.
Yeah. And the name, of course, I know Everyday Africa quite well, and I love the fact that it's daily life. But what is daily life? For instance, a protest that you just showed from Mohammed, it's also quite newsy. I think in the beginning, I'm not sure, but maybe in the beginning of Everyday Africa, these kind of images you would see less. It would be more like daily life, like day-to-day life. Is that true, or is it changing?
Oh, well, I feel like it's a pot of everything, because after every 6 stories, you'd find a story that could pass for a magazine, you know, a story that could be, that is very much similar to a story on a newspaper feature. And you'd also see something that would never be featured in a magazine or never be featured in a book. And I think that's the excitement of having a magazine on the internet. It's very, I don't know. I think I'd like to pick a line from this book. I think I don't want to use my words won't be enough, but Maza Mengiste wrote on the Everyday Africa book how they're trying to explain like the everyday, the mundane, why it's important to document that regular photo. It's because it's malleable and subject to change based on our emotions and experiences. So even like, I don't know how to explain this. Okay, let me explain it this way. I've never managed to explain to my mother what I do as a job. She never understands that photo editors are a thing. Why are you editing a photo? Is that a real job? Are you listing a thing? You know, like, but
I love that.
but just the idea that she can go through the Everyday Africa Instagram on her phone and feel like a few changes of emotion, maybe just a regular sunset photo, then she sees a story about women working in Tanzania, then feels a certain feel. It's very, as Maza writes, it's malleable and subject to change based on our emotions and experiences. So I feel like even like editors' work is very much, I don't want to say everyone can do it, but if you have like some empathy, you know what you'd like to see in a story. We know what a story is made of. A story has body. So yeah, I think in the context of what you're asking about, is the everyday changing? I think it's malleable. Yeah, it's and subject to change. So it can be on print or on new media. Yeah, I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does a lot of things. And what kind of, because the one thing I don't fully understand is, do photographers who are not part of the Everyday Africa, can they still pitch stories to you, or can only the people that are already contributors, can they pitch to you? Or could any photographer in Africa send you a story today, tomorrow? There might be some watching.
We encourage photographers across the continent and who are outside of our collectives to share their stories on the platform. Firstly, because it's the internet, there's space for all of us. Like I grew up and I grew up on the newspaper layout and understanding that there's only enough stories to be told today. But then I realized that, when I got immersed into the magic of the internet, the magic and the poison, both, you realize that there's space for all of us. So I think that's I think the difference between me and a photo editor in like 1990. We have like some unlimited space to play with. So yeah, we welcome photographers across the continent to share their work on Everyday Africa.
And if they share it with you, how do you like to receive stories? Like very practical. Do you want to receive an email with a PDF or a link to an Instagram account? Or what is the best way for photographers who want to reach you to kind of pitch to you?
So email with clear pitch style, and your favorite pics together with a broader selection, 2 files or just 1 file with your favorite pictures and a broader selection, and everything to be captioned properly, in the metadata. I don't know, is this a photographer community? Okay, cool. So, I feel like every magazine has its own editorial style, of course. And we have the essentials. We have video resources where we've described like a pitch style, but mostly if you share your story on email, share it to me and you tell me this is what it's about, and you caption your photos, we'll have a small conversation, and yeah, we see whether the photos are suitable for the platform or not. Yeah, it's a very straightforward process. Mostly because I do not like the gatekeeping process of magazine world and growing up. That transition from university to like my first freelancing jobs was so difficult, and it felt like puzzles, doing a very difficult puzzle. So when I tried to make it, just send me send me something simple and we can get the conversation talking, but conversation going. Yeah. Yeah.
Lovely what you say about gatekeeping, because I feel it's really a struggle for people recently finishing journalism school. I finished like 15 years ago, and I was quite lucky to kind of get I won an award at the World Press Photo, and that was just lucky in a way because doors started opening up. But I get so many emails, and you probably do too, from students who are like, how do I get into this place, or can you connect me? And when you know how there's so few people working at these spots, shooting for these places, it's quite annoying. So it's really amazing to hear you talk about not liking gatekeeping and to have a space, or at least have a look at the work of people that send into you. So would you have any do's and don'ts for them? Well, do's you kind of just explained, but are there any don'ts? Like sometimes you might receive things in your that you don't like to see, or in ways that you don't like to see it?
I think don't be afraid of your voice. Like your story is valid, it has space. So I guess as a storyteller, don't be afraid of your voice, and your story has a place. So it's important. Even I think this is also a lesson I keep learning as a working storyteller. Like I have to convince myself that these stories, as I write them wherever I am, are legitimate and someone will be interested because they're creative and I put in good creative work into them. So yeah, trust your voice and trust what you say is relatable to someone. I think that is a magic I keep on seeing on Everyday Africa, because you'd assume the most random stories do not have a emotional attachment to them, yet you find people connecting to them. I guess another a small tip would be just adjust your impulses. Be your first editor. It's so difficult, but I think this means you should read more, see what other photographers have been doing in the past, but don't be obsessed with mood boards. Just learn how to adjust your impulses. Going back to one of my favorite books, which I don't want to end, Akweke Emezi on Diacenteran, writes how you just have to, trust that, the story has its own magic, its own power. So when you just need to, how do I say, like, as much as you let go, learn also how to hold back. So adjust your impulses, and balance. The idea of balance is just a little bit of adjustments here and there. So even as you're working on your projects, just learn to slowly adjust your impulses. Yeah, that's my advice. I'm a working artist, so I feel giving advice is very tacky, but I think these are just tips I work with every day in my work.
It's good actually. I think there were 2 questions coming in.
Wacera, one of the questions is the book that you're talking about is your favorite book. Could you type the title of that into the chat so that we can share that with people?
And I recommend that you read it. It's especially if you're a storyteller. The writer includes you in the chapters. I won't give away more. There's a poet called Stephen Dunn, and he wrote one of my favorite quotes in his poems, and he says, "All I ever wanted was a book so good, I'd be finishing it for the rest of my life." And I've been delaying this book for a while. So it's that good.
I'm curious now. Really.
Yeah. So the title of the book is Dear Centuran.
Yeah.
And who's the author?
Akweke Emezi. I think I can only type to you, to the panelists.
That's okay. I'll put it in the chat for everyone.
I think it is going to everyone. I'm not sure. I think it is. Is it?
It is now.
Okay. And another question is, are there ways? Hello all, are there ways to collaborate or do some online training for free? For free, I would like to learn more about photo editing. Part of the selecting the photos. Yeah, that's I think a lot of people would like to learn more about selecting photos. Do you see that question coming in from Simona? It might be geared towards 7, but it might also be towards you. Or oh, there we go.
So do the everyday projects do training of any sort, and is editing part of that training?
So we have education programming, and one of our offerings includes the essentials. These are free photography classes, and they're open to emerging and working photojournalists across the world. So I'm going to share a link. We don't have a photo editing lesson class yet, but now that you've shared with me, I can take this feedback.
There's an opportunity.
Yeah, for the next iteration, maybe that would be something we could cover. So I can share the link for the essentials. It has other classes around how to pitch a story. Let me just find it.
It is a question we've asked other editors, and most other editors have reached their position without formal training in editing. They've come through journalism or photography itself and made a selection. And I think that's a fascinating thing, actually, that such an important position, not that everything has to have formal training behind it, but just the ability to be in a workshop and learn about certain things doesn't always happen with editing.
Oh, true. I feel like for me, my learning of photo editing comes very much on a project basis. To be honest, learning about color theory, learning about composition, all those things are very, technique. That's something you can easily learn off of YouTube. Like I would never be the one to trick you into a Harvard course that has a big price tag. Many of the techniques you can learn off YouTube, and for example, on Seven and on these different webinars. For example, LenFest have Photoville, Everyday Projects, Women Photograph. The organizations across the photographics industry that are working to make these resources free. And also, please just do your projects. Just take a photo, take a bad photo, and start playing around with color theory. Checking a 15-minute video, YouTube video, and just trying to. It's very touch and go because it's very visual. Like I feel like it's hard to teach someone how to sketch, like even sketch a drawing until they touch paper and to touch the pen to the paper. So as much as you can learn the technique, you have to, it's very project-based. Yeah, just like coding, I guess.
Ilvy, so turn the question to you. Have you ever learnt formally about editing, or is it something that you learn in the process of working?
I learned it in the process of working, and it's very, in a way, I would have loved to learn it from someone, but what I do notice now is that everyone has their own tricks and ways of editing. What I did learn actually, that's one question I wanted to ask you as well, actually. What I did learn throughout the years is that I prefer editing with prints. I used to do everything on my computer, but when it really came down to making a book, I realized, okay, I need this to be printed and spread them out in my apartment, on the floor, on the table, and that's a better way to make edits for me personally. And that's something I found out quite late into my career, because when I started photojournalism school, all the editing was on my laptop. So that's one thing I learned. So how do you do that? Do you print things as well? Or do you go on laptop, or maybe depends on what you're editing for?
The last time I printed paper was for government purposes.
Yeah.
I think it's not environmentally friendly, but I'm not like a recycle goddess, so I should not be judging anyone's environmental practices. But I'm very much a laptop guy. Like I have my Adobe Creative Cloud on deck, and also my phone. So everything is synced up to my like millennial, like hunchback kind of behavior.
Yeah, to be honest, when I do day-to-day assignments, of course, or shorter stories, I always work on my laptop. People are always amazed I'm on a 13-inch, and they're like, why are you on such a small screen? But all fine. But when I edited for my book, I realized, it kind of gave me another view of how the image looked on the ground. But to be honest, I think it would be great if there would be more editing workshops or learning from others. That actually, if it's YouTube or a real person, doesn't really matter, but just to learn more about it, I think would be great.
Yeah. We're coming towards the end of our time, but if anyone in the audience wants to drop a quick question in, do so. This is the last chance to get those. I think it's been an incredible discussion so far. It's really interesting to hear the Everyday Africa perspective. How many photographers are in the collective at the moment? Is it growing? And what do you see as the future for Everyday Africa?
The collective currently has 43 members, and it's growing through the African photojournalism database, which is, as I mentioned earlier, the collective built out by Everyday Africa and World Press Photo Foundation. We are very much encouraging and welcoming young African voices to the platform and searching for them, and so excited to talk to them every week. At least it's so different to listen to a 22-year-old African photographer and their dreams right now, and comparing. I'm not 22 years old anymore, so like that's it's so interesting to listen to excitement and hope. And our goal is to make sure that we see young people share their identity, their culture, what they are fighting for around social justice, climate change, migration, and all these very big topics that can, be broken down into everyday moments. We want to see all of them. We want to see as many of them being pitched, people pitching and us accepting them and publishing them, because I guess, as I mentioned earlier, the beauty of the internet is it has space for all of us. Yeah.
Well, that's fantastic. Wacera, it's been fantastic having you with us. Thank you very much for your time. Want to thank everyone in the audience for their time and questions. Ted has just dropped a quick comment in.
Yeah.
You can read that.
I'm reading. I took a workshop some years back with Ron Aviv and Gary Knight. Aside from shooting assignments and critiques, the emphasis on ethics and business side was worth every penny. And it was an investment that continues to pay dividends with invaluable insights on 7 Insider. And reading Image Reflections on Peace was a look into reality of brokering peace, something that needs attention now. Yeah. Thanks, Ted.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah. But yeah, so once again, thank you, Wacera. It's fantastic having you with us. Thanks for your time. And yeah, we'll look forward to continuing the conversation and look forward to seeing what Everyday Africa is doing, because I think it is one of the most significant platforms on the web. So thank you very much.
Good luck
Thanks
with everything.
for
Okay.
Thank you. Thanks, Wacera.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.